Are you thinking of leaving corporate, but too afraid to make the move? Have you already escaped corporate, but are finding it hard to run your dream business? Are you wasting valuable time by attempting to figure challenges out on your own? We have created a podcast for corporate escapees running their own business. This is the Corporate Escapees Podcast by Build, Live, Give. We bring you firsthand experiences of guests going through many of the struggles you face each and every day as a corporate escapee. We get real with no corporate BS. And now, over to your host, Paul Higgins.
Welcome to Corporate Escapees Experts Podcast, brought to you by Build, Live, Give. On this podcast, we get the world's best experts to help solve some of the most challenging obstacles in our community. And today we've got a brilliant example of that, someone that is got a fantastic track record in broadcasting and has now moved into the world of podcasting. I think she's one of the best people to talk about this topic in the world. So what I'll do now is hand you over to Traci DeForge, and she will talk to you about podcasting. So Traci, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation and such a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
My pleasure. So like I said, you've got a really rich experience in radio and broadcasting. So why don't you just give us a little bit about your background?
Certainly. So a snapshot would be that I spent the first half of my career in broadcast radio, primarily on the sales and management side. So that positioned me really well when I left and started my own business development consulting company, which was in 2004. So that was approximately 13 years ago. And the wonderful thing is that about 2.5 years ago, when podcasting really had its resurgence, if you will, going on 3 years now, I actually made the conscious decision to pivot my business development consulting company to focus on clients that wanted to integrate podcasting as part of their marketing strategy and their business development strategy. So for me, it was like coming home again, because radio has always been something as a medium, as something, as a business tool, as a medium, as something that I've personally enjoyed my whole life. I often say I slept with an AM transmitter under my pillow when I was small listening to ghost stories. So that either made me really weird or an early adopter. I'm not sure.
Or maybe both.
Yeah, I think you might be right, actually. I'm coming up on Halloween, so that's a pretty spooky part of my career. But it all really led me to this place, because now I can combine the business development strategist, which is a niche that I've really built for myself over the last 25 years, combined with the podcasting expertise. And it's really been a wonderful combination for me.
Brilliant. And like you said, over the last 3 years, you've seen a lot of change. What are the current trends you're seeing in podcasting, and where do you think it's headed?
Well, one of the things that I think is so fantastic about podcasting is that it's really come to the forefront, primarily because the accessibility to podcasting has really exploded during this calendar year, especially 2018. We have a lot more choices, whereas primarily before you couldn't even access or find them, you had to dig really hard. Then iTunes put the podcast app on the iPods and the iPhones and things like that. So the smartphones have really accelerated access. And now Spotify has gotten into podcasting, but they just announced that they're even broadening their opportunities for podcasters to a bigger extreme. So I think that accessibility has really then made people more aware of why podcasting is a very important part of an overall marketing strategy. And so for businesses, it's a very exciting platform, because they don't have to worry about people experiencing screen fatigue or missing a newsletter or not being able to sit with a video. They can actually put their podcast out there, position themselves as experts in the field that they're in, change the conversation in their industry, so to speak, and reach an entirely new clientele and potential new clients as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's also been, it might be just at the start, but, with Amazon and Google going into more voice, and I've just got myself an Amazon Echo
Oh,
And
did you? Yes, that's a
yeah,
huge growth area for podcasting. Absolutely. With the smart speakers, that opportunity to search podcasts and identify podcasts, listen to podcasts with smart speakers, that has increased the percentage of listenership exponentially. And Google Podcasts actually has been on the scene for the last few months, and they're expanding into even helping with creators to offer more diversified voices in the podcasting creator side of things, which is very nice. And so I think that everybody is bringing their own game and bringing it in a way that's benefiting everybody that's listening or involved in producing podcasts.
great. And what's the difference between a normal podcast that you put to air versus something that you do for Echo? Is it the same time, or do you have a shorter version? What are you seeing that's working well at the moment in that space?
Well, it's really still a little bit of the wild, wild west. People are still really actually figuring out podcasting in general and how that works best for them, whether it's in their lifestyle of creating it or in their business model in terms of taking advantage of it from an ROI. And with smart speakers, there are some certain things that you have to do with your podcast in order for it to be compatible for smart speakers. And there are actually industry experts getting in that field where you can actually hire someone to optimize your podcast for Alexa, so to speak. So that in itself is another branch of businesses that are blooming off of the podcasting industry.
And a typical client for you, just take me through a typical engagement when you work with a client for podcasting.
Oh, certainly. And what a fun question to answer. So, we typically work with busy CEOs, executives, consultants, coaches, authors, really anybody who is really has the desire to create a broadcast quality production of their podcast. And when I say that quality is really important because it is an extension of your visual brand. So the way we work with clients is we want to make sure that the audio component and the things that people hear and read and see and experience about your brand are all congruent. So one of the things that's advantageous is a client that is really wanting to have that professional extension through their podcast. But probably more importantly is that we work with the type of clients who really see the value in having things done for them so that their time and energy can be spent working on the things that's in their wheelhouse and not having to figure out how to edit something or what equipment to use or how to produce a voiceover for an open or a close of a show. So we actually handle all of those details for our clients. And what that ends up doing is helping them really focus on just having fun doing the podcast and the content that they want to create for the podcast, which ultimately elevates the quality of the show all the way around because they get to do what they love and the fun part, and then we can get it out there to the world for them.
Great, and you've sort of covered most of the key challenges in that answer there, but what are some of the other challenges that you see people coming up against when they're about to launch their first podcast?
So the challenge is coming up when you're about to launch your first podcast, and I'm really speaking primarily to maybe people who have not made the decision to invest in a podcast production partner, such as our company. If you're really just like you've done some research and you're excited and you have a really great topic, a lot of times, and I think I said this earlier, we really encourage people to change the conversation in their industry. And some of the ways that you can do that is if you have authored a book, you can utilize that to get the voice out on the content of your book, or the reverse. If you are wanting to publish a book, but you haven't written the content yet, then start a podcast. And then that way you can get those episodes transcribed and turned into a book. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest problem or challenge or obstacle, if you will, is just the fear of getting started. So we often just say, hey, it's not too late. It's not too early. The market's not saturated. Just start. And if just starting means that you're only going to release one episode a month, then just start with that. Ideally, you would want to do one a week or release a series. But if you can only factor in budget and time to release one a month, at least just get started.
And what are some of the key goals that you see your clients wanting to achieve when they launch a podcast?
I think that it really varies depending on the type of business. So we run the gamut with our clients, anything business categories from financial advisors to real estate agents to health insurance therapists. I mean, you name it. We have all different types of business categories that we produce podcasts for. And I think that one of the things that they're really looking for is to really get that exposure, have that podcast be a strong part of their overall marketing strategy, have it be the hub, if you will, and really be able to repurpose it to see if it is something that they can, the investment that they put into it, can they really lateralize that over other areas, how to monetize it. So a lot of different perspectives that way.
Yeah, and you talked about repurposing. So can you give some examples of how you might be able to repurpose your podcast?
Certainly. So repurposing, I think, actually is probably one of the most magical things about the podcasting strategy as a whole. And the reason I say that is because we're all very time starved, and at the same time, we want to be present in our social media. We want to have blogs. We want to have listeners. We want to have YouTube viewers. So there are all these different outlets and ways that we can tangibly touch a new client or a new prospect or really re-engage a loyal customer, if you will. So with podcasting, it's very interesting and so resourceful because if you generate one podcast episode, then you can take that one episode and that content is put out there through all of the podcast directories and platforms so people can engage with you that way through listening. Then you can upload that audio with images to YouTube. So it's the second largest search engine in the world. So people can find you through YouTube, but also if they are more apt to spend time on YouTube than maybe, let's say, download from iTunes, then you can be found there and they can hear your content. The other thing is, in terms of repurposing, you can invest in having your episodes transcribed. And there are several services that you can utilize that are either audio to text or hiring freelancers to actually manually transcribe it for you. But the key is to then take that transcription and edit it into a blog post, and then even further edit it by creating social media posts with quotes and content directly from the episode, and even taking that to another layer of creatively taking some of those quotes that you extract from the transcription and create those visual quote tiles and put those out and share those on social media. So you can do all of that, and including you can create newsletter content from that transcription as well. So if you think about a tire with, the center hub and then the spokes coming out, your center hub is your podcast. You create that once, and then you have all of these other spokes of repurposing content directions that you can utilize.
No, that's a brilliant way of looking at it. And some of the what are some of the transcription services that you recommend?
Well, I think, it's interesting. Again, your questions are so great and very thoughtful. So with transcription services, this has been I'm just going to share my personal experience, which is always the best one because it's the one I have the experience with.
Yes.
I personally like to use a service called sonics.ai. And I will say that it's never really my final product. So the benefit in that is that you can upload your audio straight to sonics.ai and it will transcribe your episode. But it may not be perfect because for people like us who have distinguished accents, it may not necessarily recognize every word right away. So it gives you the opportunity to then throw your headset on and listen to the audio while you can visualize the transcription that it's created, and you can edit it in real time. So that is, to me, the best if you're doing it yourself. If you are into the whole full service capacity of things, you can hire a service like us because we offer transcriptions as part of the service, or you can look on some of the freelance websites such as Fiverr or Upwork, or just maybe even posting in some of the great podcasting forum Facebook groups and ask if there are any transcriptionists there that specialize in that. It's a little pricey to have it done manually. It's, of course, you get what you pay for, so you'll get a much more accurate transcription if you hire someone to do it for you. But if you're on a budget with your podcast, then trying that service, if you have the time versus the money to invest, then invest your time in a service like Sonic's AI.
Great. And you talked about monetizing. What are some of the ways that you can monetize your podcast?
That is changing every day. So I think a lot of people think of the traditional monetization strategies where they're getting sponsors or having people underwrite the cost of their shows. One of the things that I think is that we recommend that may be slightly more innovative is to start out with, especially as a business owner, you already have an established relationship with vendors. You already have an established relationship with clientele that might own bigger businesses. And so if you want to start monetizing straight away without maybe necessarily having a ton of downloads out of the gate, then go to somebody that already knows the quality of your work. So they know that this podcast is going to be fantastic because everything else you do is fabulous. And then ask them if perhaps they want to be your powered by sponsor. And what that looks like is to say, this show is powered by this company. So they are actually coming out of the gate with you. And then that way you can go into another segmentation of monetization, which is you can take your podcast, and if you're an author, for example, we kept coming back to that book release, you can actually set up book signing events and you can record your podcast at these events. Even though you won't be broadcasting live, you can capture readers, testimonials, things like that while you're at the live tapings. It also adds another dimension to the event. You can also monetize through, we have several clients, and myself included, that have actually booked many paid speaking gigs, if you will, from people that found us through our podcast. So that's another monetization strategy. And really, as creative as you can be in any of your other marketing and advertising strategies, the same apply to podcasting, but actually maybe even give you a little bit more flexibility.
Great. And I know this question's a little bit out of left field, but when you're on site, let's say at a book, a book signing, etc., what do you recommend for a microphone to record? Because I know that sometimes you'll get brilliant studio quality audio, and then unfortunately someone will be at a live event or somewhere, and you can really hear that background noise. What's your advice for something like that?
Well, so there are a couple of ways to respond to that. One is, I think that when you're starting out as a podcaster, or if you're already podcasting but you want to kick things up a notch, it's very important to invest in a really good quality microphone, whether or not you're ever going to leave your studio or the place of which you record, because the competition right now in podcasting, with Apple having 550,000 podcasts and they're adding on average of 8,000 a week. Now, the first indication is, oh my gosh, that's so many. Well, it is, but that's globally. So if you break it down that way, there's still a ton of room in the market for new podcasts. However, what will ultimately become the challenge is that you want your sound, your quality, your audio, and everything to elevate, to rise to the top. Because no matter how good your content is, then if it hurts people's ears to actually listen to it, then they're not going to continue to download it or subscribe to it. So whether you're in studio or on location, you want to invest in one of the best quality mics that you can. In addition to that, if you have a co-host, this is another tip, secret, if you will, of the industry that's not talked about a lot, but we talk about it because it's so important, is that if you have a co-host that you're continually broadcasting with, make sure the two of you have the exact same microphone, because that's really important too, because again, whether you're on location or in studio, it will affect the quality of the broadcast of your show. But I think in terms of specifically for on location, you would take the same mic with you. The ambient noise is really can add to the event itself. For example, at 2 podcast conferences I attended, I was invited to broadcast my show, quote unquote, live from each of these different podcast conferences. And one of them, we were recorded in a hotel. They had a suite and they had a studio set up in the suite. And we actually went in and recorded our show there. It was broadcast quality audio, but it was within the suite. So quite honestly, you wouldn't have been able to tell whether we were on site or not. And then the second was Podcast Movement that was in Philadelphia recently. And they had it set up so that you could broadcast your show and have your show recorded at the event. But it was not even in the exhibit hall. It was out in the high traffic area of people walking by between sessions. And it really added to the show itself because the energy of the event came through the sound of the podcast.
Great. And I think, in the intro, just talking about that at the start, I think that certainly helps as well. So when people get to the recording, it's not a shock that there's a bit of background noise. So great points there. And what are some of the common myths that you hear about podcasting, in particular the industry? And
well, the first,
let's knock those out of the park.
I'm sorry, I just laughed. Because myths are not funny. Actually, they can be scary. So for me, I think the biggest myth is that it's so easy. And I don't want to deter anybody from telling you that is a myth, because it can be easy, but it is really not easy all the time. And the reasons for that are, if you're starting out on your own and you're doing it yourself, there's a pretty sharp learning curve that you have to learn in terms of how to handle your guest management, how to actually edit, how to record, what equipment. There's just a big learning curve on that. And secondarily, if you use a full service podcast production company like the services we offer, that's fantastic, but that doesn't shortcut the learning curve entirely, because you're still figuring out how to fit it into your lifestyle and how to be consistent, because consistently releasing content, no matter what format you're using, is the key for it to build up a loyal audience. And so I think consistency is often underestimated, how important that is. And I think, saying this in jest, but also being really serious, is I think the myth is that we will build it and they will come. And because of the popularity that ABC turned a podcast into a television series recently, HBO has a couple that they've released, I think Two Dope Queens and Pod, it just went out of my head. In Pod We Trust, I think, or something like that. But anyway, there's several of these podcasts that are getting turned into movies. They're getting turned into television series. So you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to start a podcast and then I'm going to be a famous celebrity. There's a little bit of a traction momentum process that has to happen before you go from starting your podcast to actually maybe having it picked up by HBO. And so you really want to pay really close attention to that consistency factor.
Great. And is there ever been a time when someone's come to you and said, look, I want to do this podcast, and you've said, no, I just don't think podcasting is the right medium for your business?
Well, we would absolutely be so honest about that if that had been our case. Thus far, we have not experienced that. But what I can tell you that we've experienced, and I think a lot of this is the advantage of our broadcast background, is that we take a look at every client and we say, okay, if you want to utilize podcasting as part of getting your voice be heard, changing the conversation in your industry, positioning yourself as an expert, what does that show really look like and feel like? And we spend approximately 3 hours of conversational time with each client, really fleshing out their vision for the show, taking that vision and then concepting it, because not everybody has a voice for radio broadcasting. Not everybody has the entertainment value, so to speak, that is engaging maybe for the long-term process. So what we do is we figure and build around certain situations. So if someone's energy level is a little bit low, we may recommend having pre-recorded segments integrated into their podcast. So maybe that if they're super shy or they're just have a low energy level, then maybe they only interview someone for 10 minutes of their show, but they have all this other content that they may have created in other areas. So we can either have a professional voiceover record some of that, or one of the things that we do that's really fun is capturing questions either on recorded audio through a program called SpeakPipe, or capturing questions in social media and then having those questions be answered, because some of our hosts just feel a lot more comfortable if they are having the questions asked to them. So we can really build a show around your personality, around your business, around who you are. But at the end of the day, if someone was to come to me and they're just, for whatever reason, just weren't ready, maybe they didn't have enough of a start in their own business, and maybe the focus and the resources need to actually be spent more in growing their business first and then adding their podcast. I think for me, that's the advantage of being a business development strategist. I can spot that type of thing, and I can make recommendations that say, if you can do this first, then maybe you can layer in that podcast, maybe look at doing that in 6 months from now or a year from now, which we absolutely have had to do with some of our clients. We have built some strategies for them that they don't actually launch their show till almost a calendar year later, but it's great for them because they have a to-do list of things that they need to scratch off before they actually go live with their show.
And you said, for the last 3 years, you've really focused on podcasting. What do you see happening in the industry in the next 3 years?
I think we're going to see a lot more innovation in the actual production and development and conceptual side of podcasting. I think that there are innovative business models popping up right now. One of probably the most popular model that's popping up are guest concierge services. So, for example, that's not an area that we currently offer, and a guest concierge service would be somebody who manages you. So, for example, if I wanted to be a guest on other people's podcasts, they would represent me and schedule me on podcasts. Even if I didn't have my own, they could still get me scheduled on people's podcasts, and vice versa. They could find people and bring them that were a fit for my show. Guest management is a real time-sensitive issue, and it's also a time-consuming issue for someone to manage. So having a guest concierge service is something that is really becoming popular. And also, I think people are taking it into consideration that how important the visual branding for things are in regards to the show, how important the sound quality is. So there are businesses that are creating opportunities to do it for people. And I think, too, just the idea of the types of podcasts. So there's been a big rush for true crime series podcasts. And I think because Serial really put podcasting back on the map, that there have been a lot of lookalike podcasting in that way, if you will. And now I think you're going to see some really interesting dynamics of with celebrities bringing on. I think Conan O'Brien just launched his show last week. A lot of celebrities are getting into the podcasting scene. So that's going to make the types of categories of podcasting really interesting. For me personally, one of the biggest growth areas that I'm excited about, that I see coming and that I think can't come fast enough, is the developmental side of the kids and family podcasts that are focused strictly on maybe just kids listening to audio versus gaming or being tied to the screen or the smartphone in terms of their visual fatigue, and really sparking that creative theater of the mind, if you will. And that's, to me, I think the growth there is my favorite sector.
Yeah, look, having traveled with my family for 2 months through Europe, and my children were sort of 14 and 12 at the time, I just wish there had been more historical podcast content that we could have listened to when we were going through that journey. It would have been great to do that. But so I'm with you. I really do hope that area improves significantly. And as far as where you continue to learn, and who do you follow, or how do you stay abreast and being such a brilliant expert in the podcasting industry.
Well, I am so grateful that I have a ton of people around me that are supportive. I'm a very strong advocate for the podcasting groups. You've got to find the right one that's your tribe. So for me, when I very first even started out just as a podcaster myself, I got involved with a podcast group called She Podcasts. And yes, it is female targeted, but yes, I am a female. So it's been really advantageous. I have since, as an extension of that, Elsie Escobar, who is one of the co-founders of She Podcasts, she spun off and did what she calls an e-league, which is an educational community series that she does about every quarter that you can sign up for if you're a podcaster or if you're a podcast in the podcast business. And so I routinely am a member of that. I was recently added to the advisory board of the Podcast Business Journal, which is a fairly new launch that's happening. And I read voraciously every single thing I can find. So I read Hot Pod, which is a newsletter. I read Pod News, which is a newsletter focused on podcasting. I attend podcast conferences. I'm a really big fan of Jared Easley, who puts the Podcast Movement Conference on. There's a female conference in New York called Work It for women podcasters. So I'm entrenched. Like, this is my life. I eat, breathe, and sleep it. But my goal is to, because I've done a lot of international press around podcasting as an expert, my goal is actually to attend and or speak at an international conference. So maybe I'll be coming to the UK in 2019 because that's a goal that I personally have for myself. So I'm just putting it out there to your listeners. If you know anybody who needs a speaker, then maybe I can show up in the UK.
Great. And we could also get you down to Australia. There's the We Are Podcast conference as well that I know is run each November, which is a lovely time to be in Brisbane. It's normally run in Brisbane in Queensland, so we'll have to get you out to that as well.
And Australia is on my bucket list, so that would be even better because I just have to survive that really long flight. But I think I could do it if I was coming and hanging out with you for sure.
Yes. Yeah, great. Yes, I don't normally have alcohol on a plane, but definitely that long flight helps.
Yeah, I think that might be more of a Tylenol PM situation for me. Or load up a lot of podcasts on my phone and have a battery charger. That's for sure.
Yeah. Great. Well, look, it's been awesome hearing your expertise on this topic. You know, I'm like you. I'm so passionate about podcasting. I think it's great. And if someone said, what's the one thing that you would love to do every day of your life, for me to be, listening and recording podcasts, I think it's brilliant. And I know I've learned a lot from listening to your content, watching or reading your blogs, and someone in the community that's listening right now. If you want to get a real expert in podcasting and help you through that journey, like you said, that 3-hour setup, but also just the quality of the broadcasting, which I think is a key point. Traci's definitely the right person for you, and Traci's kindly given us access to a brilliant ebook, so you can go to produceyourpodcast.com/ebook, and we'll have the links and other links that Traci's spoken about in the show notes. So, Traci, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you down under.
Excellent. And, thanks for listening to Traci from Produce Your Podcast. If you'd like to find out more about other brilliant experts that we have in our community, you can just go to blgboost.com. You can join our membership and get access to all of those. And I'd love to hear what you thought of this great interview with Traci. So email me at paul@buildlivegive.com, and we'll certainly pass on any questions you have as well to Traci, because she's got such a world of knowledge and information there. So let's take the opportunity to tap into it. And if you'd love to share this episode with other people that are interested in podcasting, other corporate escapees, please do.
Absolutely. And feel free to contact me with any questions, because I am all about helping people grow and learn more about podcasting. So I'm absolutely an accessible resource for you.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Traci.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Corporate Escapees podcast, brought to you by the team at Build, Live, Give. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it with other corporate escapees. If you would like to join a community of like-minded peers, please visit www.buildlivegive.com. Until next time, thanks for listening and be brave.